This video is brought to you by viewers like you. In a world that's so politically divided, where everything is on fire and each day feels like the end of the world, it's nice to have a fun, family-friendly film that doesn't try to get too political. So I'm gonna be really honest with you, I missed this one when it came out in theaters. It didn't speak to me. But after hearing everybody talk about Joaquin Phoenix's performance and how great Guðnadóttir's score was, and then starting to see these two get a whole bunch of awards, I decided to go and check it out when it came out on Blu-ray. And since I never saw it in theaters, I've been swarmed with a bunch of critical responses to the film without ever really having that initial contact. And so now that I have seen the film, I find those critiques even more fascinating, especially from a musical perspective. In a really bizarre way that I don't think I've ever seen happen with a film, a lot of the criticisms levied against this film almost directly parallel with musical choices that they made. It's super weird. Like, okay, look, so a lot of the people who hated the film tend to say the same thing, at least from what I've seen, that it's just a knockoff version of Taxi Driver, the king of comedy, and that the only reason that it became popular, that anybody saw it, was because it was a Joker film, and people still can't get over Heath Ledger's performance.
I hate the Joker because it's ultimately just a derivative pastiche of Scorsese. It's like, hey, what if the Taxi Driver wore makeup?
Bruce Wayne's father, who's just a cartoonish dickhead, punches Joker in the face. Jerry Langford was way more realistic in how he dealt with Rupert.
But on the other hand, for people who loved this film, at least from what I've seen, they kind of feel like the whole Batman tie-in thing was a little unnecessary and sort of took away from the film.
I do feel like that was that a reshoot? It feels like that was tacked on. Like the movie had this clean ending. They were like, we do want to see the Waynes get killed in this movie, and this is a good opportunity to do it. It was just some other clown who did it. But I do feel like it was a little like they had to nudge, like, hey, this is still a Batman movie.
But for some reason, they just couldn't fucking help themselves but to shoehorn Bruce Wayne into the story. Every single scene where they tried to connect the Joker story with the Wayne family was really annoying and embarrassing.
But they'll say that the rest of the film was great, especially Joaquin Phoenix's performance and Guðnadóttir's work on the soundtrack, which is kind of a weird thing in that both people who loved and hated this film kind of sort of agree with each other at some points. Both sides are effectively saying that they want less comic book in what is ostensibly a comic book movie, whether it be the Joker stuff or the Batman stuff. And both sides tend to agree that Phoenix's performance and the soundtrack were the best elements of this film. And honestly, now that we're seeing the awards start to pour in, it looks like everybody agrees with that. But these are also strangely poignant observations about the music in the film. It's really weird to explain. Okay, check it out. So Taxi Driver was the last film that the legendary composer Bernard Herrmann scored. Bernard Herrmann, for those who don't know, scored a lot of Alfred Hitchcock's films and is known for his work on the masterpiece Psycho. Now, an interesting point about Psycho is that Psycho came out in 1960, but was in black and white, even though most films by then were in color. Just for contrast, The Wizard of Oz came out in 1939, 21 years before Psycho. But Hitchcock wanted that black and white vibe, and to emulate that monochromatic element, Herrmann limited himself to just using a string orchestra. Just the strings. That's why that Psycho stab sounds the way that it does. Which kind of raises an eyebrow when we get back to Joker, because Guðnadóttir prominently features strings in her score for this film. So if you're a film music buff and you see a film where the main character suffers from some sort of mental health problem and has a strange relationship with his mother, and the score is widely reliant on strings, you kind of get an eerie familiarity around the whole situation. Now, to be fair, I don't think that this was intentional. Guðnadóttir's principal instrument is the cello, and from what I've heard of her work, she features her cello a lot. And that's not necessarily a good or a bad thing. Some composers just have a very unique sound. But in how she decided to score this film, we kind of come back to all the criticism about the Batman and Joker stuff. See, Batman is a huge franchise spanning like 100 years or whatever, and everyone has their favorite Batman theme. It might be the original from the 66 show, or the Elfman score from the 89 film, maybe it comes from the animated series, or any of the other billions of Batman interpretations. But what's important to remember here is that no matter what your favorite Batman theme is, you're wrong, because the best Batman theme actually comes from Batman Returns, and I can prove that with facts and logic. But that's a video for another day. But the thing here with Batman, like with most superheroes, is that he tends to have a strong theme. The whole superhero thing goes way back. I already have a whole video on it. And whatever hero you're putting on the big screen, they tend to have one big, super recognizable melody, and that's what people latch onto. So it makes sense that if the director Todd Phillips wanted to avoid a comic book tone for this film, then he'd want to avoid that one big, super recognizable melody. If he wanted to distance himself from the superhero vibe, then he wouldn't want the Joker getting anything resembling a superhero theme, which means that when you get to the original score for the Joker, instead of one big noticeable theme, you get these really interesting and intricate textures. That's not to say that there isn't one main melody to latch onto. If the Joker does have a theme, I'm pretty sure it's this.
Come on, this guy's weak. Can't do nothing. Harder! Harder! Get him up. Take his stuff. Let's go, let's go. Come on, come on, come on. Let's go, let's go, let's go.
But even if this is technically the Joker's theme, I don't think anyone was walking out of the theater humming this cello line. I really feel like it serves more like a background texture or a mood. Now that's not to say it isn't noticeable. This is unavoidably recognizable. You hear that cello and you immediately know that that's for Arthur. It kind of haunts you, it follows you around. But really, it feels like the way they got around the whole comic book vibe from a musical perspective was having this textural soundscape for Arthur's life. And Guðnadóttir does a really great job of utilizing this texture-based style of composition in this film. You can very clearly see her organically grow these subtle textures as a scene gets more and more intense. It's almost like a living thing. It just saturates the musical landscape, and before you know it, you're in the thick of it. Like, just look at the scene where Alfred tells Arthur that his mother's crazy.
Thomas Wayne is my father. He left me.
The musical fabric smoothly flows with the emotional intensity of the scene. On top of that, I really like the instrumentation that she chooses to add and when she chooses to add it. Initially, we just get this haunting solo cello supported by these lumbering timpani. Anyone who's ever been stuck in a 9-to-5 totally gets how much it can feel like a dredge, and I feel like the music here really emphasizes that. But check out what Guðnadóttir adds when Arthur realizes he's been hallucinating his girlfriend. By the way, if you want a clue as to tell that he's hallucinating here, if you pay attention, she calls him Arthur.
You're so funny, Arthur.
But he never told her his name when they first met.
Hey.
Your name's Arthur, right? You live down the hall?
There's no way that she could know that his name is Arthur right here. But anyway, right here when he's figuring out that he's been hallucinating the relationship, you start hearing this metallic percussion in the background. And it kind of stays throughout the rest of the film whenever the energy is really high. And to me, it almost sounds like someone banging on top of a trash can lid, which could be a reference to the garbage strike that's been going on. The only problem is that this isn't the first time a composer's used a more textural sound in their film score. This isn't even the first time a composer's done this for a Batman story. When working on The Dark Knight, Hans Zimmer actually talked about wanting to avoid the superhero tropes of the 70s, 80s, and 90s. He wanted to create his own sound.
I didn't want to write a summer blockbuster, happy, indulgent score. I wanted something that was truly provocative and people could truly hate.
And he put a lot of work in developing these more textural sonic landscapes. Not so much develop melodies, but try to create more of an acoustic backdrop. But Zimmer's abandonment of prominent melodies and embracing these textural sonorities, whether you like them or not, sparked a new style of film scoring that really defined the 2010s. But what that means is that when you get to a film about the Joker, trying to make it sound less like a traditional comic book film by ditching the late romantic brass lines and embracing a more saturated texture kind of feel almost directly forces you to compare it to The Dark Knight. So when you hear similarly harsh and relatively uncommon sonorities coming from both soundtracks, for me, it formed a kind of connection between these two films. So the creators for this score were kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place. You could sound like Batman, or you could sound like Batman, which is sort of what both sides have said about this film. Some people say that it feels like a Scorsese film that they just made Joker themed to appeal to the Heath Ledger Joker fans, while others say that the Joker movie was great, but we didn't really need to tie it back to the original Batman story. So all in all, comparing these criticisms to how the music manifests itself is really fascinating. But for me, the most interesting part of people's reactions to this film is the divisive final scene. I heard a lot of people saying that it wasn't really necessary, but for me, this final scene is what tied everything together. The idea with this final scene is that it kind of gives Phillips an out. He can say that the whole film was just a joke that Arthur thought while he was in the hospital. Or maybe the joke is just that he's thinking about Bruce Wayne's parents dying. And this ties in with what we've seen with Arthur. When you get down to it, he's an unreliable narrator. He hallucinates, he frequently doesn't remember things the way that they actually happened. This guy's got some really serious problems. And at every twist and turn, the film really works to try and make Arthur as much of a sympathetic character as possible so that the audience can see things from his point of view. But this scene is ever so slightly out of character. Like, instead of his compulsive laugh, here he's telling us that he's laughing at a specific joke.
What's so funny?
It's just thinking of a joke.
Maybe he's making an excuse for his laugh to the therapist, or maybe the joke is that Bruce Wayne's parents are dying, or maybe the joke is that the whole film is just a story that he told and he made it up in his head and he's laughing at the audience. Who knows? The point is that people think it's a cop-out, which I completely disagree with. Musically speaking, this scene explains what's been going on throughout the film. It's really cool. Okay, so throughout the film, on top of Guðnadóttir's original music, we also get all of these other pieces of recognizable music. Like, we open with this old ragtime piano, which feels really turn of the century and lighthearted, which directly contrasts with Guðnadóttir's heavy scoring when Arthur is assaulted and the happy clown veneer is shattered. The shock of changing from one to the other mirrors what happens throughout the film. Then we move on to some of that big jazz band sound for the Murray Franklin show. We get all kinds of older pieces of music coming from radios, tunes like Lawrence Welk's The Moon is a Silver Dollar. We get the film Shall We Dance playing on the TV when he first uses a gun, which also kind of relates to how we get Charlie Chaplin's Modern Times accompanied by a live orchestra. We hear Smile when he's on stage and his performance starts getting better. All of these older songs have this innate nostalgia surrounding them, calling back to a simpler, happier time. But then things get weird. We get My Name is Carnival, which kind of feels like it has a different tone from the other tunes in the film, but that might have just been me. Then there's this segment on the subway right before his first murder when a frat bro starts singing Send in the Clowns to try and taunt Arthur, which seems strangely out of place and out of character, but who knows? It looks like it's supposed to be a New York analog. Maybe this guy's really into Sondheim. Who's judging? Well, him, I guess. He's judging. Anyway, moving on. We then get this big showstopper with the iconic dance scene at the staircase that everyone's copying. We hear the infamous Rock and Roll Part 2. A little tune that everyone knows from countless pep rallies and football games. And if you've ever been in band, then you've had this tune floating in the back of your head for years. And the only problem with this moment right here is that Rock and Roll Part 2 was written by Gary Glitter, who, as of 2015, has been sentenced to 16 years in prison for being a child predator. So I get that in the States, a lot of people know this as the Hey song and heard it played by their marching band during football games, but since Glitter's conviction, even professional sports teams have been removing the track from their repertoire. So maybe there's something there about some kind of victory from an adolescent perspective, but it's really unfortunate that it not only made it into this film, but it was used in the iconic apotheosis scene where Arthur ostensibly becomes the Joker. But I think the tune that drew the most attention for me was That's Life, performed by Frank Sinatra. We hear it throughout the film. It's actually what Murray uses as a sign-off.
Thanks for watching. Good night, and always remember, that's life.
And it's what Joker says to the camera right before the feed is cut.
Good night. And always remember, that's...
But for me, the most fascinating usage of this tune is during this scene. See if you can pick up what's going on here.
That's life. That's life. And as funny as it may seem.
So let's talk about diegesis. When you talk about diegesis and the music in a film, you're asking what music the characters can and cannot hear. So none of the Avengers here can actually hear the Avengers theme being played, but on the other hand, Quill can hear the music coming through his headphones. So this is diegetic music, this is non-diegetic music. So with that, let's look at this scene again and ask ourselves one simple question. Is the music in this scene diegetic or non-diegetic?
That's life. That's life. And as funny as it may seem.
And that question is what makes this scene so amazing. You can't really answer it. At first it feels non-diegetic, like he can't hear it, but then he starts singing along and you think, can he hear this music? We've heard a bunch of tracks being played like this throughout the film. Was he able to hear those pieces of music? Like, check out this scene. My Name is Carnival is diegetically playing on the radio.
No, it says right here it was a mask.
Either way, I think it's good for business. They got clowns in front of every newspaper.
Then it seemingly transitions into non-diegetic music when he crosses out the sign. It doesn't feel like it's still coming from the radio.
Hear my name, Carnival.
And following that scene, check out what he tells his social worker.
I heard this song on the radio the other day, and the guy was singing that his name was Carnival, which is crazy, because that's my clown name.
So aside from the fact that this is the first and only time we've heard him use the name Carnival, kind of echoing how he never told the girlfriend his name but she knew it anyway, you kind of gotta wonder, how much of that song was in his head? Is this something that was playing on the radio in the background, or is this another hallucination? Is his character's name actually Carnival? What about this tragic scene when he's bombing on stage and he doesn't realize it and we hear Smile?
I was just thinking the other day, why are the rich people
Right as everything starts to fall apart, the lyrics here are particularly powerful.
Smile, though your heart is aching. Smile, even though it's breaking.
This is a message he's telling himself, be brave and put on a good show. But are we just listening to what's playing in his head? What about when this guy starts singing Send in the Clowns, or when they're listening to the radio when he's giving his mother a bath? Was this guy actually singing? Is the radio on? Or are these elements of Arthur's altered perspective on the world? And with that in mind, let's go back to our first dance scene in the bathroom and listen to what Todd Phillips has to say.
She'd been sending me music throughout while we were shooting, and I just wanted to play Joaquin this piece of music, and he just starts doing this dance, and we both kind of look at each other and said, okay, that's the scene.
So if you're a big fan of this scene, not to throw Guðnadóttir under the bus here, but really, this scene is a testament to Phoenix's performance. This is sort of the Joker equivalent of Fantasia. We're watching a visual interpretation of Guðnadóttir's work, which is even more interesting when you find out that Guðnadóttir wrote this music before ever seeing the film.
Because I wrote quite a lot of the music before they started shooting, so the music influenced the performance quite a bit.
So there's this complete circle with how the music and the visuals come together. The music and the film develop into each other and infuse the complete work with this interrelated creation, which is really amazing. The music feeds into the visuals as much as the visuals feed into the music. But you hear Todd Phillips himself say that the Joker has music inside him.
When I first met with Joaquin and we first started talking about Joker, I talked to him that Arthur is one of those people that has music in him.
And to some extent, you have to acknowledge that, yeah, we're hearing what the Joker's hearing. In this case, we're literally hearing what both the actor and the character heard in that bathroom. It's a really amazing philosophical application of the music in this film. And in that sense, that's what makes Joaquin Phoenix and Hildur Guðnadóttir's work on this film so amazing. They fed off of each other to manifest this new creation, this thing that has music within him. Like everything else in this film, we aren't just being told a story, we aren't just seeing Arthur become the Joker. The intention is that we empathize with him, sympathize with him. In his own broken world, we're led to believe that his actions make sense, and the music feeds into that message. In a way, the music is a window into the Joker's madness. Thanks for watching. I'd like to thank my patrons for making these videos possible, with an extra special thank you to Alec Kulikowski, Alex Klinker, Clara Tan, Hayden Elza, Jordan Adams, Karen Rosenow, Kate J, Myron John Tatarin, Noah Gray, Praylock, Rafael Martinez Salas, and Who Am I? I'd also like to thank everybody who requested that I talk about the film scoring trends of the 2010s. I really feel like The Dark Knight was a pivotal score that sort of defined the whole decade, and this Joker film is a really interesting sort of interpretation or answer or contrast or something to that. If you like what you saw here, be sure to subscribe and check out my other videos. Follow me on Twitter and Twitch to have your musical questions answered live, and if you really like what I'm doing, then consider supporting the channel on Patreon. But that's all I got for now. Thanks for watching.